Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Uncorked with Funny Wine Girl. This is Funny Wine Girl, aka Janine Luby. And if you've been listening, and if you haven't, shame on you. What on earth is wrong with you? But it is April and it's National Humor Month. And again, if you do listen to my podcast on any kind of regular basis, you know that pretty much every week you're going to hear from a woman because that's part of my mission to promote other women because we have a lot of good stuff going on. I'd like people to be informed, enlightened, entertained, inspired, all that good stuff. So National Humor Month is during April. So I'm super excited. And I have to stop saying that because I find I do that in every intro. I'm super excited. But I am always excited to promote laughter and humor in any capacity because we need it. We certainly need it in our lives. And the truth is, it does help us. It helps us to feel better. I know personally for myself, I do laughter yoga sessions. And while I would be a skeptic if I wasn't the one leading them, because it's like, what the hell is she doing? I know how I feel afterwards. And I know that's because of the breathing, the laughing, and that sense of connection and camaraderie. And humor, as if you listen to my previous episode, I said humor and laughter are actually not the same thing, but humor can often lead to laughter. But humor is so much more than that. It's a way for us to cope. It's a way for us to talk about difficult topics, to communicate, to bond, to connect. There's so many wonderful things about it. So without further ado, I want to tell you just briefly how I know my guest this week, and then we'll start talking to her. I always say will, like there's somebody, like there's a mouse in my pocket. I don't even have a cat or a dog. So it's literally me. There is no one else. My plants are barely struggling to stay alive. So anyway, Roya Hamadani is someone I met. Oh gosh, might be now. I can't even remember. 4 years ago, I do ladies comedy nights at wineries and private events. So if you own a winery and you want me to do a show or a private event for ladies, I always like to promote female comedians and have an all female audience just for a nice sense of camaraderie. And I reached out to, I want to say, Valerie DeMambo, I think, who put me in touch with Megan Getz. And Megan is actually going to be appearing at my May 5th show in the Poconos at Mountain View Vineyard. And Megan said, hey, would you like me to maybe bring another comedian? She's really funny. She can do 5 minutes. I said, sure, absolutely. And the rest, as they say, is history. Roya appeared. We've worked together many times since, and she's hilarious. And I'd like to welcome Roya Hamadani. Welcome, Roya.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I should say, for those of you who are listening, you should go to YouTube because Roya had her hair blown dry and it looks really nice. Not that it doesn't normally, but we were just discussing it before I hit the record button.
Yeah, it's not usually like this. Normally it's kind of tied back or on the top of my head and stuff's coming out of it because I'm not.
Stuff's coming out of it.
Yeah,
Look out.
Like, the hair won't stay. Yeah.
So you got to go admire her coif. You really have to go check that out. So Roya, before I forget, just because I know my mind these days, Roya is currently, but soon to be leaving us in Pennsylvania. She's in the Lehigh Valley area, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But she has a show coming up very soon because you're going to be hearing this. This publishes on April 14th. April 16th, Steel Stacks, Bethlehem. She's got Pigeon City. It's a really cool sketch comedy, some live, some video. Worked really hard on it with a bunch of other talented people. So if you're in the region, check her out because then she's leaving us. She's moving to Massachusetts. So folks in Massachusetts, get ready. We're sending someone funny your way. So where do we even want to start? What do you want to do? You want to talk about your, let's talk about a little bit about Lehigh Valley. So you pretty much started the Lehigh Valley Stand-up Women group, right?
Yes.
It's on Facebook, but it's not just on Facebook. You created this so that women could get together, kind of bounce ideas off one another and with their writing, their comedy, if they just enjoy comedy. And it's become more of like it's a network, but it's also kind of like a little bonding family group, but like a really nice supportive group.
I've tried to make it that, like, it occurred to me that it's hard when you first start to stay in it because you show up, if you're brave enough, you show up at a mic and it's like 99% male. And oh, my cat is screaming at me. But it's 99% male, and it can be in a sort of a weird environment. Like it's usually in a basement. So you're in this basement with male strangers, And it's like 10 o'clock at night, and it just doesn't feel like something you want to do. So it's nice to have a buddy, and so
Like
this
my
is a
first eighth
way.
grade dance. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and it's a nice way to like, especially put women together who are willing to then like go to a mic together, or yeah, and it does help. It really does help to have like friends when you go to these things. So that was part of it. Also, like when you first start out is when you need the most support. And I noticed that when male comics start out, all they have to do is to go to the same mic like 3 times in a row, and they've joined the brotherhood. Like it's real fast. Like they just get right in there, and it doesn't matter really if they're good or bad at it. It doesn't. And whereas women are still just sitting there like, oh God, what's happened? I'm still here. And there's a point where you can't get your friends who don't do comedy to come with you anymore. And that's how you know
Yeah.
that you've done it. That's how you know you're becoming a comic, is because they won't come anymore. So I really just wanted to build that. And when I used to run Stout Laughs, like there was one night where there were like 14 women on the list. It was one night that happened, but it was a magical night. Like that kind of stuff doesn't happen pretty much ever. So it was, yeah, so that kind of thing. That's why I started it. And it's hard to keep going because women are just hard to pin down in general. Like oh my God, if something happens, especially when women have kids, it's very difficult to remove them from their homes because they are integral to the running of their homes and to the children's well-being. And
Yes.
so getting them out of there is hard. Having them have any energy to get out of there is hard. And then the younger women have the time to come out, but there are not as many of them trying to do comedy. Actually, more women start later. So whereas guys, you've got like 17-year-olds going out there, women aren't starting. A lot of women are starting in their 30s, sometimes in their 40s. Sometimes they start because something happened. Like I've seen a pattern of women who've had cancer and then they recover and then they go stand-up comedy. It's like we're getting like a pipeline straight from the hospital, and it's awesome because they have they have like a lot of life experience. They have and they're making humor out of stuff that was really hard for them. So but yeah, all of these things make it that women are starting later. Women don't have as much time to do it. Women are going to be like vastly outnumbered when they go to mic. So I wanted to try to create something that would be helpful for them. But it is tough to like try to keep it up though.
Yeah. Yeah. And I should mention, you mentioned that when you were doing Stout Laughs. Now, Stout Laughs, Roya was running an open mic in Bethlehem. And I think if you listen to the April 7th show with Aaliyah, we talked briefly about that because we talked about, and I asked her about, I lazily, because I live in Scranton and I'm like the old lady from the Titanic and don't like driving in the dark. I did not make it down. Years ago, I made it down. I forget who was running it then, but I did not make it down. But I used to love reading the recap on Facebook. And I did ask Aaliyah about that, how it was to be a woman at those, because I remember you saying a lot of times, like you were just so sick of the dick jokes and, and some of the guys just getting disrespectful and all that whole thing that was going on there.
So it's beyond dick jokes. I feel like it's straight up misogyny. Some of it is just pure hatred towards women. So that is a difficult and toxic thing to have to sit through. And you have to, as the host, sit through it because you're timing them. And like, I know my husband, it's like you try to go away in your mind, but for some reason I always seem to wake up when the worst stuff is on. I was always paying attention, unfortunately. It was very hard because, and it's always hard to go to a mic. If you go to a mic, you can leave the room when something like that happens, but when you're running it, you can't. And there is a lot of misogyny. And the weirdest thing is, and of course, a ton of racism and anti-Semitism. This is the only place you're going to hear the Holocaust jokes. Is at an open mic. That always has to come up occasionally. But it's just, what's the weirdest part? This is the weirdest part, is that sometimes they will say these terrible things, and then you get to know them, these boys, and they're not bad. They're not bad guys. It's just that they think that this is what's funny. They think that this is how you make people laugh. And they think it's edgy. And then what happens is they start telling it, and all the stupid boys laugh, and that invigorates what they're doing. Like that encourages them. And then they just keep going down this dark and stupid path, not noticing that all the guys that are doing that are not getting booked. They're just coming to the boys club at the mic. So what I would do sometimes is catch a young one right when they start and be like, okay, you come this way. First of all, this is how you hold a mic, because they were always holding it wrong. And I was like, secondly, stay with what you're doing. They're going to try to turn you wrong. Don't do it. Like, I would take these young ones aside, and I always tried to encourage the women too, but like anyone who was new, really anyone who was new and wasn't making horrible jokes about dicks or, misogyny, racism, I would just take them aside and give them the little spiel of like, keep doing what you're doing. Don't worry about what those guys are doing. If they're not laughing, it's probably a good thing. Just like, and that I took it very seriously, my host duties. And I also would try to be very neutral, which is very difficult, because as a woman, I felt like in comedy, like if you polarize, if you become enemies with someone and you're a woman, it is so much worse for you than if you were a man.
Yeah.
And you will lose opportunities based on that. And even with people who don't even know you, they'll just be like, oh, but this person doesn't get along with this person. Because a lot of times, like when people are booking shows, it's kind of like putting together a table at a wedding. They don't want to put people on there that are going to like get in a fight. And so, so I just was always like, I'm just going to be neutral, even with the guys I don't like. And that's hard. But I had a couple of times to take, well, more than a couple of times, take a man aside and explain why what they did was not okay. And that is the most uncomfortable discussion in the world, when you have to start it with, I know it wasn't your intention, when sometimes it was.
Yeah.
But to have to like, okay, I'm going to do the Obama, this is a moment of teaching moment with you again. Again. But it's very stressful. It was very stressful, but I felt like I had to do it on occasion whenever a man like stepped to the point where they actually said something to a specific woman. So someone said something to me while I was on stage. Another person started commenting on women who were coming to the mic online, and I had to take them aside and say, okay, it's one thing when you go up there and you objectify us, but when you specify, you attack specific women, or I don't know, address them, and like makes us all feel unsafe.
Yeah.
So that was another part of the responsibility I felt as a mic runner. So that was 2 years of that, and it was very stressful. And my therapist was sick of hearing about it. Oh God. One day she's like, do you realize you talk about the mic every time you come here? And I was like, oh, you must be really sick of it. like real sick of it. But then it was funny because a couple years later, one of the guys that I did encourage in the beginning said to me, he said, we all respected you so much. The guys who kept coming every week, they were like, Roya's the real deal, which I still don't understand what that means, but they respected me, and that made me happy. I do know that I won them over to just treating, and I mean, when they knew they were in this environment, like I can't say that they weren't ever disrespectful to anyone, but at least they weren't to me. I was like, that's at least one thing that's going to happen. But towards the end, I knew it was time to stop when a guy said something to me on stage, which has never happened before, a racist thing to me on stage. And I started screaming at him. Oh my God, till he was shaking and had to leave. And it was good. Like, it was a good thing I did that. I mean, maybe not in that way. Like, probably not that way. Probably you should have taken him aside. But this was like, I realized, like, I was like, I think I have to stop now, because now I'm willing to start screaming profanity at a person who's on stage.
But you made it for 2 years. I honestly, I give you credit. And I mean, what you were doing is good, because you're helping put them on the right path so they don't fall into that, like, oh, I'll just follow this guy because he's doing this. And again, the respect, I think that's important. But you did it for 2 years. Honestly, I don't think I would have been able to do it for like 2 or 3 weeks, because I would have been doing the profanities probably by week 2. So my hat's off to you for that.
Yeah. I mean, it had its rough moments. I thought to myself, when I would go to Philly, I'd see these mics being run by multiple people, and I'm like, oh, that is the way to do it. You take turns. You have a team, because doing this by yourself, like it used to be me and Ian, But then he started taking a class on the same night, and then it was just me, and God, that was depressing. Because like you walk in and nobody who works there thinks you run the mic. Like that's the thing. Whatever man is around, they will assume it's that guy. They never think it's the woman who's running the mic. And then the second you put down your equipment, some dude is coming, wants to start messing with it. And I have to be like, no, just stop. If I ask you for help, fine. But if not, like, just don't touch my shit. and then you'd have, just that whole having to just deal with all of that stuff. But the worst, like, not the worst part, but one of my least favorite parts was putting out the list, because all of a sudden 20 to 30 men were all around me like sharks. I put down that clipboard and run. I was like, this is the stuff of nightmares. They're all gross. They're all crowding. They're following me. Oh, it felt like I was throwing chum in the water.
I was gonna say, yeah, you were the chum. It's like, get out.
It was the list. I had the chum. It was the list. I had to throw the list and run. Yeah.
You talked about, and if we could transition a little, you talked about like some of the things, they're misogynistic jokes, anti-Semitic jokes, and the racist jokes in your stand-up. And I've seen you do your stand-up many times, and I love your material. You address some of that's happened in your own life when people are like, well, what are you? Or like your ethnicity, they're confused or like rudely asking you, but you make it. And this is what I love about what humor can be, like raising the conversation, like, okay, that's not cool to do. And then talking about it. Do you want to just talk a little bit about how that came about and what I'm referring to, just so the audience knows?
So yeah, I do a few jokes now. I think I've probably written more that you haven't seen about how people ask me my ethnicity, or how people start guessing what I am, as though I'm some sort of, an object. Like, where could that be from? Which Asian country or Latin American country or Middle Eastern country do you find one of those? So that's happened my whole life. So yeah, writing jokes about it is really, I feel like it's also like educational for the audience. Like, hey, don't do that thing. Because even people who ask it, they think politely. You're still asking someone you don't know where they came from, which is not cool, because the only reason that you ask someone like that is that you want to make some assumptions. Like you get to know a person and then you ask. I don't mind being asked once I know the person. I have a friend who didn't ask me for a year, and she's just assumed I was Indian. Like, no, somewhere after a few times we hung out, you should have probably asked. But yeah, it's just that whole idea of like, don't ask it as the first thing. You can ask eventually. You just have to wait.
Yeah. So getting to know you, being your friend, be like, oh, could you tell me a little bit about like, your ethnicity, your culture, your traditions? Tell me about it so I understand and I get to learn something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And then that's how you understand what my family's like. Because I have a bunch of jokes about my family that make sense if you know that my mom's Filipina, if you know that my dad's from the Middle East, then you know, like, oh, okay, that all makes sense. Otherwise, it's just like they're insane. But yeah, I think, and then the other thing is what's weird is that, so I don't know what happened somewhere along the way. I remember when I first started doing comedy, started watching comedy, was Margaret Cho was the person that I loved so much, because she made fun of her mother and she did her mother's accent. And I was like, that's cool. And my mom used to say to me, don't you ever do that. And now I do that. The little girl would have been so happy to know that eventually it would happen, that I would in fact imitate my mother for strangers to enjoy. But sometimes there have been situations where I've quite felt, it happened in Philadelphia, where I think someone like lighted me early, which means shut my time down early, like kicked me off the stage basically early, because I was doing my mother's accent. And there's this strange concept that if we do our parents' accent, we're being racist. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm not doing all Filipinos. I'm doing the one that tortured me specifically. Like, whose vagina I came out of. Actually, I didn't. I was a C-section and she's still mad about it. I have the scar, so like, it's not racist. Like if you tell me that I have to make my mom sound white, that's racist. so so I feel like sometimes I feel like prefacing like my jokes about where I'm just like, I'm going to do my mom's accent. And if you think this is racist, then you're basically telling me to make my mom sound like a white person. Okay, here we go. Because I thought about doing that because I'm going to the Boston area and I'm kind of afraid that might happen again where because of, it's just kind of like, because I'm 45. I'm 45. I'm just trying not to offend people all the time. I'm trying to say they were not supposed to. I'm trying to use the right terms. But I think sometimes that just like the sound of someone doing their parents' accent for some reason strikes people as wrong. So I know I'm going to have to defend myself at some level. But you know who only gets dinged for this? No one else. Oh no, only Asians. Only Asians.
Okay.
Or Hispanic, you can talk like your parents or basically anyone in your race all you want, but Asian specifically must be policed. And that's the great thing about being Asian is that both white and black people can tell you what to do.
In case you're ever wondering, you got a lot of help.
If you're ever wondering, we are policed on both sides.
Aren't you glad?
I mean, either, being Asian is a very weird thing because like when I was a kid, I remember going to somebody's house and she's like, my dad doesn't like brown people, but he doesn't mind Asians because you work hard.
Jeez.
I was like, oh, okay. But then on the other hand, I'd have people making fun of my dad being from the Middle East and saying that he was building bombs in the basement. And then other people saying that Asian people eat cats. And that truly is all races other than Asian love to get together and say that. It's like a thing that it comes together. White, black, Hispanic, they all come together and go, Chinese people eat cats. And I've had to deal with that from everybody. Like, please stop. But so it's weird being Asian because of that. It's like we don't quite fit. We don't really fit. And then I don't really fit because I'm half Filipino and half Iranian. And those groups are almost as far apart as you can possibly get. Because like one eats only pork almost, and the other no pork. like one's Catholic, one's primarily, Islamic. And then what you only get that's in common is the rice. The rice holds the two groups together. Only the rice.
But it's a starting point. It's a peaceful starting point, right?
It is. It's rice. It's
we get together over rice.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's the only thing that holds us all together.
You mentioned Margaret Cho, and this is a little bit off topic. Well, not off topic, but so you talked about like, okay, doing your mom's accent. That's your mother. I mean, you're, and the idea that someone would actually think it's racist. What do you think of, and this is just asking your opinion. I remember watching a couple years ago, Seinfeld's Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, that show he did, and he had Margaret Cho on at one point. And they talked about how she was in a club in Jersey somewhere. And she pretty much got, I think, booed off stage because she did this joke about incest or rape, about how it had happened to her as a kid. And then, how her mother said, oh, don't think you're so special. It happened to me too, or your sister, or like a joke, something like that. She got booed off stage. Seinfeld. And of course, here you go. Male white savior is going to help fix things because he got her in there again at the club where he appeared and she was back at the club. And I had a conversation when I was teaching part-time. I used to teach public speaking at a local college, and I would have my students do a monologue. And I was talking to this gentleman who was about 5-10 years older, wore the tweed coat, again, white dude, thick hair, talking about what should be done in comedy for all of his experience, which is none. And we talked about, like for all his stage time, I'm sorry, what was it? Oh, because he taught. But we had this conversation the one day about rape jokes, and I don't know how it came up, but he's just like, well, no, that should just never. And I brought up Margaret Cho because my point was, and again, this is just my philosophy. If something happens to you and you're using humor to get through the pain and you're talking about it, that is completely your business. Now, is there going to be someone in the audience who could be triggered or whatever. And I'm
Mhm.
not saying that wouldn't hurt, but then, okay, you can feel how you feel, you can leave, you can be offended, but I don't think that she can't do the jokes that she
Mhm.
wants to do.
Right.
And he's like, well, no, just rape. And I'm thinking, okay, one, you're not a woman, two, you're not a comic, so shut up. But anyway, how do you feel about that whole thing? Like, she pretty much was booed off stage, and that's just the one incident that I had seen and read about.
That's terrible. I don't think, I mean, that's the thing, is like, I really hate when people don't allow or start to police somebody when they're talking about their own experience. It's one thing if she were making fun of rape in general. You'd like to think a person would be booed off the stage for that, but that
Right.
rarely happens. But when people talk about their own personal experience, it can make people very uncomfortable. But then I think silence or leaving are both options. Like, no one is forcing them to be there. And but it's like, if something traumatic happens to you, like most, like the things that have happened to me that are traumatic, that's almost everything in the comedy that I do. Like, there's almost no, I don't really joke about too many good things. Like, it's not like I had this great day, let's make some jokes about it. That's not really what happens. Most comedy comes out of a place of pain or suffering, yep, or being rejected or something terrible. But rape is like a very, very terrible thing. So I can understand, like, I can understand being like uncomfortable. There was a woman who came to the mic and she did rape jokes because she had been raped. However, in the way that she had done them was the same way that you would hear a very horrible young man do it. So it was blaming herself and making fun of herself for being raped victim. And it was hard to watch. And I was like, that's what she needs to do. I'm not going to say anything. I'm certainly not laughing, but that's what she needed to do. Was it horrifying? Was it one of the worst things I've ever sat through? Yes, it actually made like probably top 5 worst things that's ever happened to Stout Laughs to me, because it was just like, it was so hurtful to me to think, oh my God, someone is dealing with it in that way. But that's their business, like you said. And you can just not laugh. That's how an audience member should, unless someone is saying something so awful. Like, I will say this, somebody said something about Chinese people eating cats when I was in an open mic recently, and I could not stop myself. It just came out of my mouth. For fuck's sake. It just came out. I felt like it just came out because I was like, come up with something new. New. This has been around for so long. It's so unoriginal. So hack racism. But yeah, I hate to hear that because I have friends who have had terrible things happen to them, and a friend of mine who'd been kidnapped and has tried to make jokes about it, and it's people just kind of don't quite know what to do. A friend of mine whose brother died in an accident really suddenly and horribly has made an entire special out of it. But our people, because he couldn't put these jokes in a regular set. When he tried, people were just like, wait, we were talking about your kids and nice things, and now what's happening? So he had to put them in a different special. So I do think sometimes you might have to say, like, okay, we're now going to head down another path. Like, prepare the audience, perhaps. You might have to do some preparation, because it is, it's just a very tough topic. And people, I think people, especially because they'll fall into a couple of different categories, but everybody will start to feel bad for you. And that's a hard thing when you're up there. It's hard for people to then laugh at you if they feel bad for you. So that's why it's hard. It's challenging.
Yeah. I remember working with Liz Russo for the longest time. She was awesome. She opened up for me, and I'm like, she should totally not be opening up for me, but like, it was my show. And then eventually I'm like, no, you're going to be the headliner. But I remember one of the last times we worked together, because she went through issues with weight and like, and food and everything. And she used to do a lot of jokes about her weight. But I mean, I knew her, and I shouldn't say I knew her, but I mean, our time off stage, I never got the sense that like it was like she was comfortable, with what she was doing, her jokes. And I remember like her doing the jokes that something to do about her weight. And then some woman in the audience, like while she was up there doing her set, like, oh, don't say that or something along those lines. And Liz addressed it, which I was glad she did, because she's like, no, you don't need to pity me. I'm doing these jokes because this is, how I've coped for years, and this is my, you know what I mean? This is my story. You don't have to feel like, don't do that, but, and that says more. And we tend to forget that what we say, and I'm an asshole too, we're all assholes, what we say reflects more about us than anybody else usually. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, so that woman, she felt the need to say, but she didn't have to do that. I mean, let Liz do her thing.
Yeah. Sometimes it is an unintentional reaction.
True.
It is. Sometimes it is. And you never really know what someone's coming from. Like if they know someone who's really struggling with their weight and feels bad all the time, if they have that in the back of their minds. That's why I used to do a joke, and I don't really do it anymore, but I was like saying I'm not good at being a girl. I'm not like put together. I'm more held together. And I had to kind of stop because of so many women instantly going, "You're beautiful." I was like, holy shit. I can't because we support each other so much. Sometimes I think you have to maybe preface it with like, I'm going to tell this joke. I happen to love myself and think I look great. Now that we've said that, I'm going to say that, but you can't really do that. So it is an interesting dilemma, because I've seen her stuff too. And I like her, and I think she's really funny. I think that some people might mistake it, because they don't really understand. Like she's saying, it's witty. It's like, and they're especially, I think too, it's especially when somebody tells a story about someone else putting down their weight, that you don't realize that the comic is now making it their own, taking control of it, like basically turning it into comedy gold. So somebody does something shitty, I'm just like, great. Now I get to talk about it. Because a lot of times in the moment when they're saying that horrible thing to you, you can't think of what to say. Like, so this is your way of saying it 50 million times to other people. Like you did, So, but it is. Yeah.
I think some of it needs, and again, I like to get geeky, look at it from a different perspective about like different types of humor and how maybe the average person, if they're only watching certain kinds of humor, that they don't get this other stuff. And again, so I guess what would annoy me at times is like, so the comic doesn't have to change because you don't get something, I mean, like gallows humor, right? Like the dark humor. People, and I we used to go to conferences about humor, and I've read different books, and I like getting geeky about it. But like, like people in war and combat that would tell, like they'd say the darkest jokes just to help them cope, or emergency room nurses and doctors, the things that they see, or firemen or policemen, that if they were to get up on stage and tell them, the average person in the audience would be like, oh, they'd be gasping. But you don't get to tell those people that they can't tell those jokes in their own like niche, with their people, you know what I mean? Because if it's helping them literally do the job that saves people's lives, then they should have that as a coping tool. Like, you know what I mean? Then you can't tell them not to do that. It's just that out in the quote unquote real world, they couldn't really do those jokes because they'd be like,
it would be harder.
Yeah.
It would be harder. Yeah, definitely.
But like you said before, and I remember years ago reading Judy Carter's book, The Comedy Bible, and talking about humor coming from our pain points, like the stuff that causes us pain. And I think, I remember reading about different comedians, and I was like, geez, I don't know how funny I'm going to be because I haven't had enough tragedy in my life. But, you'd read about like Louis Anderson came from, alcoholic parents, I think, and all these different things that's why a lot of comedians turn to humor, because it is coping and it is helping, but they're also raising awareness to a lot at the same time when they are talking about this, because other people can relate. But to your point, it is a lot of the pain, because how interesting would a joke be if you're like, I just had the best day. Yeah. Someone bought me a coffee. Yeah. No punchline here. They bought the coffee, and I was like, yeah, pay it forward.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that comes close is like, if you do all observational humor in which nothing is a complaint. Ron Funches is the positive comic that I have seen. He doesn't want to say anything negative. So for the most part, his jokes just all like kind of swing upwards. That would be a person, if you want to be a positive comic, I would suggest watching him, because he's positive and yet still funny. Like he doesn't really, like I wouldn't say that it's all like happy, but none of it is dark. Like, and so it's like, oh, okay. Cause normally I love dark humor, and I was like, I still really like this guy because he's so witty. And so I think, you can decide, like people, I mean, does Seinfeld do anything that's sad? It doesn't feel like it. Like,
Yeah, probably not.
some people just stick to that, like all the, and they end up being called clean comics a lot of times too. And they get mad about it. A friend of mine gets so mad about it. He's like, I can sell things that aren't, I don't do that to cover feet. And I was like, you talk about your cats 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10 times. And they're adorable. So yeah, but that's fine too. It's like, because there's always different environments for comedy. Like you can go into a bar. Like this is the thing I finally started to be able to do. To go into an environment. I could never do this before. I would have my set and I did not vary from it. But I just managed to go into a place, realize that they liked a certain kind of humor, and then change my set accordingly. I have not been able to do that before, but I finally did that. Sometimes you go into a place and you're like, oh, you guys don't want to hear about race. You just want to hear sex jokes. Alrighty, that's what we're going to do. Here come the dicks. Because I have my dick jokes. They're just from the perspective of a woman. So, and vagina jokes. And dick in vagina jokes. And yeah, because sometimes you're in an environment, and then other times you'll be in an environment where like these people are not going to like that. We're just not going to go there. We're going to stick over here with the race stuff and the family stuff. And then some audiences is like no race stuff. Like you say one thing and it's like they all clench up. So you're like, okay, here we go to mom stuff and stuff. And yeah, it's just, those are my 3 things, by the way: moms, family, race, and sexy jokes. I'm trying to work on others. I'm trying to get some others. I'm trying to go into a new direction. Like when I look at my jokes, I'm like, those are the 3 main categories.
But that takes some skill, what you're doing. Like I haven't really, I mean, I used to do improv, but I haven't adjusted my set like that. So props to you, because that does take skill. Like it's you being in the moment and realizing, okay, this is not flying here. Like they're just not into this stuff. So good for you. I mean, that does take some skill, and you got to be like, all right, I got to switch it up here.
Only happened once.
but it's a good start.
But it's a good start. It is the last time I just did comedy. And I don't know. And it's weird because I'm moving, I kind of have to start over. So I don't, I have this weird, like, I was getting, booked in this area doing 20 minutes. I'm going to go to that area and have to do 5 minutes at a mic, or 4 minutes or 3 minutes, depending, because, you get into the cities and the smaller the mic time. And it's going to be something else. But I did find a mic out there that is unlike any mic here, because it is in a bookstore.
Ooh.
Owned bookstore. It is only for women and non-binary people. And it is like, there's no alcohol or dudes and dicks. I can take my niece, 15 years old, and wants to do stand-up. She loves John Mulaney. And I was like, I want to take her to an open mic where it won't like harm her. Like in her mind, like things won't stick there and just fester like wounds. So I found one, and you don't really find those kind of mics here.
Yeah, that's unusual. That's really cool. I mean, that sounds like it's right up your alley. I mean, you have, unfortunately, the people listening will have missed the opportunity, but you do these shows. Is it books and comedy, or it's a game show?
Book people. Yeah.
Book people.
Yeah, I do it with my husband, and it's more of like, we find these crazy books when we're out and about. And so we thought it would be fun to like develop a game show that's just like people answering questions, like, because like, which of these is a lie, and 2 of them are crazy myths, and the other one is like a lie, and they have to figure it out, and just like weird vintage food, like trying to guess what's in it, all the aspic that used to happen, that kind of thing. So it's something fun we can do together, because I met him doing stand-up. Like I met him at an open mic, and I would not suggest to any woman to purposefully go to an open mic to find a husband or a boyfriend. I would not ever recommend this. It can happen still. It's like, but like, I got the only good one. I should say that. The other good ones were taken, so I got the one that but it's something we can do together, which is fun, because stand up you do by yourself, and he has other interests that, kind of take him away from it. And it's harder, like in some ways it's very hard to be a woman in comedy, and some ways it's good. So like there's fewer of us, So less competition when someone's looking for a woman. It's the same thing with being a brown woman. Then it's like a twofer. You're like, okay, all white male on up, but we got her. It was brown and female. We got 2 for 1. We're good. So you get sometimes more opportunities that way, but at the same time, you still have to deal with the whole like women aren't funny, blah 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 blah. She's going to talk about tampons or something, and I have made up some tampon jokes because I believe that we should talk about them. We need to talk more about things that are our stuff, and yeah. So I think too, like but I feel like I have like, because my background is so different than most people. There are very few Filipino Iranians. My sister and me are the only ones I know. There is a Facebook group of several hundred, but I don't know where they are. I don't know if I believe
they're really lying.
I don't know where they are. Some of them they're still babies. They're not doing comedy. So I think I have that going for me. But for him, he's going into comedy in a whole new city as a straight white male. No.
Good luck.
No, a lot of those.
I'm kidding. I'm teasing.
Yeah, but he does his comedy is really witty. There's no grossness. It's like it's
that's why I like him.
People have to pay attention. Exactly. People can't be drunk to appreciate him. So that's why bar shows are kind of a nightmare. So I'm hoping that, we can, both settle in, and he'll be able to be booked at places where people are paying attention. Because he does really great in like when it's a real show and not just like, oh, we showed up at this brewery. They didn't know there was going to be comedy. No one knew. Like literally, you have a bar or brewery or a winery. Seriously, you cannot just do ambush comedy. You cannot do a free show somewhere where they didn't come there for it. They wanted to talk to their friends. And now these people have a mic and are telling them to shut up so they can talk. Oh, that's a bad idea. That's such a bad idea. Oh God. See, you do it the right way. People buy tickets and they come, and that's what they're coming for.
And they usually behave pretty well. But I've had so many people, and I don't know if you'll agree or disagree. I've had so many people who are like, oh yeah, at the winery, that's great. Because then your audience can get nice and drunk. And it's like, I don't want them drunk. Like, I'm sorry. I had one show with Megan Hanley years ago, and she's killing it now, but she went with me to Wyalusing, which is like way out. Now I shouldn't say way out, but it's out in the boonies up Route 6, really nice foliage route if anyone wants to see pretty leaves in the fall. But we went to this winery, and they also happen to have a funeral home right behind their winery tasting room. And they had the chairs set up in the viewing areas of this funeral home. So we performed there. And I remember the woman who worked there was like, oh, we're so excited. We have a busload coming from Towanda. And I'm like, oh shit, busload. They just wanted to get trashed. They were like, it was literally like half the audience was older women, like 40 and up. And then the rest were like 30-ish, 20 something, and they just wanted to be trashed. And the show was a nightmare, but now I can kind of laugh about it. I mean, I still get paid, so whatever. But it was like, it wasn't funny. These girls were literally like laying on the one couch and not even sitting upright. Like, no, that's not what we want. At least that's not what I want. I don't know.
Well, I mean, as long as they're not interrupting me, they can lay wherever they want. It's the second they start talking.
Yeah, and they were.
Yeah, that's the problem. Like, that's the thing. I will say this. The nightmare scenario when you go on stage is a bachelorette party. That is the nightmare scenario. That is 6 women who are going to yell at you. Like, if you're a man, they'll yell at you one way, but if you're a woman, they'll do like, yeah! You tell them that happened to me too. I got a dick pic and then you're like, oh, it's the helpful heckling that nobody needs. I've had to tell a woman, like, she was screaming, yeah, it's a girl, and I was like, please, yes, it's a girl, please stop screaming at me. And then she like realized what she was doing and piped down. But yeah, it's like, oh no, this is my theory about when women get drunk, why we're so terrible. We're terrible when we're drunk because it's the only time we can say whatever we want. Like, all the other times we're being good girls. Put some alcohol in us, we're like, we are douchebags. We're gonna be assholes. We're gonna get our asshole in because this is the only time we get to be assholes. We're getting concentrated into this 4-hour window. So so we can go back to being nice people for every other minute. So
living it up.
yeah, that's what I think to myself when they're being really horrible. Like, they probably just have like, terrible home lives and like really terrible jobs. And why can't they get her out of here?
And truthfully, some of them, and I think with the wine shows, I should probably be a little bit more patient with it, because maybe it's one of their only nights out for the month or whatever, you know what I mean?
Who knows?
Or year even. Yeah, you're right about that. Like they're
Yeah.
too busy taking care of their kids to soccer or whatever. And this is their night to get out. So
yeah. And that's when it's just like you have to rein them in a way where you get them on your side, and then they're a little less like just like getting in the way of it, and a little bit more on like encouraging it as opposed to getting in the way of it.
Yeah.
So it's like, and I've seen comics do really well with this. They'll just, even there was one that said to them, he was like, I'm on stage, I'm here, I'm not on the TV. I can hear you.
Liz Russo used to say that to them.
Yeah,
She's like, really, I can hear you. We can all hear you.
But then he'd be like, so what are you talking about? Whose birthday is it? Stuff like, because usually you'd find out it was someone's birthday. Do you remember I was doing a show with you and a woman was like, she was right in front of me and started getting on her phone and stuff. And it was like, I had to say something because it was so disruptive. I was like, oh, hey, what's going on? And she's like, I just found out I'm not pregnant. And I was like, that's great, I think, right? Yes? Okay, good. Yay. And then it was like, that was done and she could stop whatever she was doing. So sometimes you just have to say, like, what's happening over there? Why is there a celebration?
Yeah. And that's tricky too. And again, I can't say I've performed enough to really be that good at it, knowing how much, because you don't want it to then make it all about them. And now they're taking you off track of your show. But at the same time, you can't, sometimes you just can't ignore. You got to be like, hey, what's up? And then deal with it.
Yeah. Because if they're directly in front of you, I mean, I've had situations where I heard them in the back and stuff. And I'm just like, what am I going to do? Just keep marching on, because I can't do anything about that. But it's right up in your face. But it is always dangerous to address the audience because you don't know where it will go. It is. And I remember I was doing a show and I had to go on last. I was supposedly headlining. This has never happened before, but I had the same amount of time as the other people. It's just like, I'm just going last. Whatever. It's fine. But like there was a woman in the audience who was talking a lot. And my friend who was opening was talking to her. And I felt like screaming because I have this comic I know named Frank Vignola, who's very cool. I like him a lot. He's a little bit like, he mentors me sometimes because he's really good at figuring out why a joke isn't funny. And he calls it, you don't give the dogs people food. Because you're just like, throwing gasoline on the fire. And I'm like, this woman, by the time I get there, is going to be incorrigible. So the next comic goes up and she talks to her, but less. And she starts to go down. I get up there and I start this is a problem with me, is if I know that the audience is going to maybe talk at me, I start really fast. So there's no room for them to talk, but also I'm talking too fast. But it does have a tendency to like kind of pipe them down a little bit because there's no room to talk. And then the second she started talking, I was just talking over her and not addressing her at all. I'm like, we're not going there. And then eventually, I guess she realized like I felt it. I was trying to like take the pot lid and put it on the burning on the fire. It's just like, let's just take away the oxygen. And by the end of it, she had stopped talking altogether because she didn't like what I was saying.
There you go.
She did not like my sexy jokes.
No, she didn't like the sexy jokes.
I heard her say something about Jesus. Like she was still making comments, but mainly to herself. Like, she needs to find Jesus or something like that. And I wasn't going to talk about that.
You're like, no, not going there. Not going there.
No.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on. And we're going to start wrapping up here. I am going to say, it's so funny. When you said you were moving, I was like, oh my God. And it's like, I'm an hour and a half away from you and don't see you, but more maybe once a year or whatever, but still it feels like you're going to be so far away. I'm like, but I won't see you. And it's like, but you don't see her now, you jerk. But I am saying it's a loss to the Lehigh Valley area and to Pennsylvania. And it's a gain for Massachusetts that I hope they embrace. So I wish you and Ian and your whole family luck in Massachusetts. I hope you find the right stage that you really enjoy and get to perform and do what you enjoy. Anything that you wanted to say before, before closing that you just wanted to share or let people know?
Well, I don't plan to not come here. Like I still, like you said, I see a lot of people not in person that sort of rarely, but I still want to come down here and do shows and stuff because Ian's family's here and I like it here. I still have my Pigeon City sketch group here and I have a lot of people I'm friends with. I'm moving because of like family reasons. But I have a warm place in my heart for the comedy scene that's here. So I definitely don't plan on, I know it feels like far, but I said this to somebody who is same thing. I was like, we see you once a year. So when we come down and visit, we'll probably see you more because then it'll be special and you'll want to come over and not cancel plans every time. I said to this guy and he was like, oh yeah, maybe. But
Yeah,
yeah,
maybe.
I'm definitely a little bit sad, but also excited. And I'm hoping that if I do manage to, maybe who knows, even be able to produce shows up there eventually, that I can bring friends up because they'll have a guest room to stay in.
Very
And we'll
cool.
do a show in Massachusetts.
I actually performed in Massachusetts probably before I was even ready, but it didn't go terribly. It was some kind of dinner thing that I did in Cape Cod in the middle of winter. That's
Oh,
probably why I got the
been there.
job. I think it was February. I'll never forget. That was,
Yeah.
gosh, that was like 15 years ago or 18 years ago. It was a long time ago. And I don't even remember what the heck the group was. It was like a dinner thing or something, but it was I remember it being cold and it's like, I wasn't going to the beach. It was February up there. We went to the mall to kill time and then checked in and it was a nice enough, like a little resort, just a dinner comedy thing. But
Mhm.
yeah, it was, hey, every experience, as they say, stage time is stage time, right? It's always a
Right.
good thing. So it was good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Roya Hamadani. If you're in the Lehigh Valley area, Pennsylvania, check out April 16th. Make sure you get to Steel Stacks and check out Steel Stacks because it's a very cool place. Lots going on there. You've probably heard me say to Aaliyah. Aaliyah is doing shows there, a lot of good comedy, improv, stand-up, all kinds of fun stuff, sketch comedy. But check out Roya, April 16th, 8 p.m. It's a Saturday night. Get out of the house, Pigeon City. And they can find out details on Facebook, right? And they can check you out.
Yeah, and steelstacks.org/comedy. And Aaliyah is also a show she's doing at the end of this month, April 30th. She and I are both going to be on it, the Slumber Party show, where we'll be doing comedy in our pajamas and also doing Truth or Dare.
Oh, awesome. I didn't know you were going to be in on that because when I had Leah on, we talked about it and I said it reminds me, I'm just picturing like the scene in Greece where they're, having a pajama party, like piercing each other's hair or piercing each other's hair. Piercing.
Ears.
I,
That'd be
you
fun,
know,
though.
you know how the
Pierce your
earrings
hair.
hang in your hair, in your
Yeah.
hair. Oh God, I think I just had a
When you
stroke. I
pierce
don't
your
know what
hair.
happened. But I just pictured that and I'm like, that seems like such a cozy, fun kind of event, I
Yeah,
think. Yeah.
I'm gonna wear a onesie. So
Oh my gosh. So you have to, so Steel Stacks, check that out. April 16th, Pigeon City, but April 30th,
Slumber
the
Party
fun slumber party. That seems like it's going to be a blast, truly. So, and check out Steel Stacks. It's steelstacks.org, right?
/comedy.
Slash comedy. Lots of good stuff, classes, all kinds of cool stuff going on in Lehigh Valley area. And it's not that far from my peeps here in Scranton. It's just that I'm a weirdo about driving. But hey, if you go, maybe we can carpool. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Roya. Thank you for being my guest, but also for being a comic on my shows and for getting to know you because you've been great. And I love what you're doing, how supportive and encouraging you are, not just to comedians in general, but especially women, because I really do believe in that. And it's nice that they have someone to help guide them, a role model, and someone who's genuinely nice and funny. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
You've been listening to another episode of Uncorked with Funny Wine Girl. This is Funny Wine Girl, Janine Luby, and keep listening this month for more funny women. I'm losing track of, okay, so next week, which would be April 21st, you will hear Elizabeth Marcon, who I actually got to know through Roya because she took Roya's workshop, comedy workshop. So you hear from her. She is an attorney who's trying to bring more humor into that field. So you'll definitely want to listen to that. April 28th, we'll close out with Gab Bonesso. Gab has been on my show before. She's a comedian who's working hard to raise awareness about mental health, and especially also now with children, because there's a lot going on in this country with mental health of children, pretty much mental health of all of us, but you're going to want to check that out. So thanks again for listening. As I always say, if you like what you heard, please make sure that you subscribe and share. If you don't like it, tell your goldfish, tell your cat, tell your dog, or message me privately. But thank you again for listening. I appreciate you from the bottom of my heart and the bottom of my wine glass.